Today's guest has had as big of an impact as you can probably have in protecting the species we love. He produces a product that allows us all to appreciate the wins in fly fishing and in conservation. And today you're going to get a behind-the-scenes look at one of the largest groups in fly fishing so you can better prepare your gear, your trips, and your life for more success on the water this year. This is the Wet Fly Swing Podcast, where I show you the best places to travel to for fly fishing, how to find the best resources and tools to prepare for that big trip, and what you can do to give back to the fish species we all love. Kirk Deeter, editor of Trout Magazine, who has been working as the editor there for 13 years now, is going to take us behind the scenes into Trout Unlimited. We find out how he looks for wins in his stories, whether they're conservation or otherwise. We find out why he thinks we are actually in the golden age of outdoor writing right now, and what he also thinks about the $1,200 fly rod and why you might not need one. And also, he's going to get into Fly Lab and what he has coming here and the success of this project and how it's coming together with angling trade. And I don't want to miss, he's got a new book coming. He announces it for the first time today. The title, You Get It All. Let's get into it. Here is Kirk Deeter. How you doing, Kirk?
I'm doing well. Thanks, Dave. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for putting this together today. It seems like I get in these episodes and we've done a lot, and we've heard your name a lot out there, and it's great to have you on here, whether that's through TU or some of the other stuff you have going. But we're going to get into Trout Magazine, which you have been the editor for. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about some other things you're interested in fly fishing. But before we get there, let's take it back real quick on fly fishing as far as your start. Do you remember? Do you have a first memory out there?
Yeah, I learned to fly fish when I was dating my now wife in college. Her dad and grandfather were big into fly fishing. They have family cabin on the Pier Marquette. Well, it's on the Baldwin River in Michigan. And I was visiting, and I wasn't going to make the cut, I don't think, if I didn't take up fly fishing. I grew up on the Wisconsin side of Lake Michigan, and always loved fishing, but I was a gear angler until I met my wife. And then, ever since I just really took a shine to it. And one thing led to that. I always been, a hobby, and then started mixing the writing with the fishing, and one thing led to another. And years later, it's become a career. So,
yeah, right. And you're with one of the biggest, we talk about this a lot about the conservation groups out there. TU is one of the biggest for sure. But we always talk about, how big, right? Are there others out there and all that? So we might talk a little bit about that today. But how did your writing come first, and then when did the TU and kind of Trout Magazine and all that come to be?
Yeah, so I was a sports writer after college, and I had a local newspaper in Philadelphia, and but I had always liked the fishing, as I said. So I started to dabble, and I got a chance to write a magazine story for Fly Fisherman magazine in the mid-90s. Terry Gunn, who's from Lee's Ferry and owned that operation down there, he was gracious enough to make an introduction to John Randolph, and I wrote a story for Fly Fisherman. I thought, wow, this is pretty cool. I get to write stories about fishing. And then I was about to, I wanted to be an outdoor writer, and I was about out of money, and we were about to move back and take a corporate job back east, but I sent in my resume on a whim to Field and Stream, and Sid Evans, who was the editor at the time, invited me in for an interview. And he asked me, I live in Colorado. Yes, he said, but I came to New York to go to this interview. And he said, Dieter, how many days a year do you go fishing? I wasn't doing a lot of work at the time, so I told him the truth. About 150 days a year I'm out on the river. And he said, and why would you want to come to New York and ride a train and work in a cubicle in a city? And I said, because it's Field and Stream. It's the Yankee pinstripes of the outdoor world. It's as good as it gets. And he looked at me in the eye and he said, well, why don't you stay in Colorado and write stories for Field and Stream magazine? And it was the coolest thing that anybody had ever done for me. And I took that ball and ran with it, and still have fond connections with the Field and Stream group. And I'm proud alumnus there. But about 13 years ago, TU came calling. Trout Unlimited wanted me to edit their magazine, and realizing that none of this stuff has been possible without the conservation first if you don't take care of the water, there is no fishing. I really couldn't say no. So I've been doing it I don't count in years or months anymore. I count in issues, and I'm working on my 52nd issue of Trout Magazine right now.
Wow, 52nd. Amazing.
Yeah, quarterly publication. So it adds up after a while.
Yeah. Yeah, 52nd. That's so cool. And yeah, there's a lot of great things about Trout Unlimited, obviously. Probably so much that we can't even, cover it all today. But what is it like going from like Field and Stream versus Trout Unlimited? Are there a lot of similarities there between your job and just the publications?
Well, I try to make it, when I came to Trout, I wanted to make it a fun read, and yeah, there's a conscience, and we talk about conservation stuff in there, but I was lucky enough to have worked with John Gierak and edit his stuff, and work with Dave Whitlock and some of these, Paul Brune now. And I'm also really proud that we have a lot of really talented women authors and editors involved with Trout Magazine. So Aaron Block and Christine Peterson and all that. So we try to make it equal parts inspiration and information, and not be heavy-handed on the conservation stuff, rather make it fun so that you want to read the magazine cover to cover, and you want to be entertained, you want to learn stuff, a tip or a trick or two, but then you trip over the message, obviously, that it's important to take care of these rivers, and fortunately we have a really loyal base of people who care, and it's an honor for me to write and edit a magazine for that audience, because I consider it talking to the people who care the most about fly fishing.
Yeah, no, I agree. And we had John Gierak on a couple times, and one of those times, we were talking about just the conservation piece, and I can't remember exactly what I was saying, but I was asking him, like, do you find it, like important to always cover some conservation topic, right, in your writing, however you do it? And he said, yes. He said, yeah, he thinks it is important. And I think that the conservation, I think, is sometimes a struggle because, like you said, it gets this down, especially, now and things, right? There's lots of struggles out there, whether that's Alaska, Chinook, or other issues. I feel like it's a big, there are some downer messages, but it sounds like you're able to keep, through Trout Magazine, keep it more upbeat. How do you do that exactly? Is that, first off, getting John Gierak, somebody like that, is amazing, but how were you able to do that?
Yeah, well, actually, John came to me. They had a nice long run, John and Bob White, with Fly Rod and Reel magazine for years and years. And then sadly, Fly Rod and Reel went under and they needed a home. And John called me and said, how about Trout? And I said, absolutely, you're welcome. And he, now obviously he's gone and we miss him very much. But believe it or not, we still have a few of his stories in the can that we're going to run.
Oh, wow.
The last unpublished Gierak stuff. And Bob White is still working with us. And anyway, I felt really honored that they would think well enough of Trout to want to have that become their new home. And a lot of people do. I think I get a lot of queries. I get a lot of people who aspire to write for Trout Magazine because it is the largest print publication in fly fishing as far as our reach and audience.
Oh, it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. Okay.
By a lot, actually. And I mean, the honest truth is I have 150,000 subscribers who get the magazine whether they want it or not. Right?
Yeah, right. Well, and that's amazing because if you think about, you mentioned Field and Stream, which is a gigantic, right? At one point was gigantic, but they're probably not as big in the fly space maybe as they used to be.
That's right. Back when I was writing for Field and Stream in our print heydays 20 years ago or thereabouts, we would mail 5 million copies of Field and Stream. So,
wow.
Yeah, I mean, it was a good learning experience for me as a writer because, I mean, you're bearing your soul for a lot of people and you got to develop thick skin. And no matter what you do, someone's going to have a complaint. But most of the time, if you're making people happy for an audience that large, it's a boost to your own spirit and, really fuels your imagination, and that's fun. But you're right. As far as Field and Stream was all things, it's hunting mostly, gear fishing mostly, and fly fishing was a tiny little niche. And yet now fly fishing for Trout Magazine is the big draw. So I feel like I'm kind of still relating to a similar type of audience and similar demographic. So it was a pretty easy transition, actually.
Right, that's amazing. And on the issues, it sounds like as far as keeping things upbeat and stuff like that, how do you do that with the issues out there? Because you've got some pretty big things. I mean, climate change, water temperatures, and all this stuff. How do you do that with the magazine to keep people, you know what I mean, like keep it a little more like people want to read, even though there's some downer stuff?
Well, you look for the wins, right? Show me the money. So people want to know what works. And climate change, you mentioned, huge problem, huge challenge for sure. But actually, the stuff that we do can mitigate the effects of climate change. Planting trees along the river and taking out obsolete small dams to keep currents flowing reduce the temperatures of those rivers by 3 or 4 degrees. In a world where everyone's running around like Chicken Little, the sky is falling. What are we going to do about this climate change? There's nothing I can do. Well, truth of the matter is that we can roll up our sleeves and get some stuff done and make a big impact now. And I mean, it's not going to be 20, 30 years before we see the results of some of this stuff. Taking out some of those dams has made an immediate impact. And so with a nationwide network of volunteers and people and our staff, we've got 300 people working across the country for Trout Unlimited. I think people don't realize how big Trout Unlimited is. It's approaching $100 million a year in, and the stuff, and the vast majority of that is plowed right into fixing rivers, so the fodder is there. There's a lot of really ripe opportunity to talk about wins, and that's what I focus on most. Every once in a while is, we've got this challenge, and
Right. Bristol Bay or whatever the issue is.
well, Bristol Bay we won.
Yeah, you did.
So far, and that's a great example. Taking out the Elwha Dam, and the fish have come back already.
Yeah, the Klamath dams.
The Klamath dams have come out, and they've already seen fish moving up in some of that water. I mean, it's never 100% done, and I guess that's a frustration I have. You still hear the specter of what could happen in Bristol Bay, and we got to be diligent and all that stuff. But I as a member of Trout Unlimited, which I was long before I became the editor, I like to know that the money's well spent and we're getting results, and we're not just agitating people or getting them worked up so that they say the sky is falling. And the other thing about TU, and I'll say this, I'm obviously a homer for TU, but we do actual work. I mean, there's science, there's bulldozers, there's hydrologists, there's engineers, that people who actually do more than just advocate or lobby the government. We're much more than a lobbying organization. We do a lot of boots in the water work. And I think that that's an aspect for me as an editor. Again, it's easy to find stories when there's actual work being done.
Right, that's easy. Awesome. Well, I think that's a great start on TU. I have so many questions, and like always, we won't be able to get to all these. But one big one I have is on just TU itself, like with the area it covers. I think TU, a lot of the things we hear about are kind of U.S. focused. But does it go outside of U.S., outside of North America? Are there projects in other areas, or what's the focus there?
I think we're not officially, we don't have like chapters and councils in Argentina and Australia and other places, but we do have partnerships. For example, we've had good friends from Australia, Tasmania specifically, come and tour, and we do co-op type information sharing with that group. And they come to Colorado and they work up and down the Rockies and see what we're up to and take some of those lessons home, and vice versa. I've been lucky enough to go over there and see what they do and how they manage fisheries. And so, especially in this day and age, digital connections allow us to share ideas and stuff. So,
yeah. So there's a little bit of overlap there, but obviously it's trout, Trout Unlimited. So, I mean, the focus is trout species, right? I mean, you're covering all, and there's a lot of interesting trout, species and of interest that come up here. But when you go back to John Gierach, who we mentioned, how does that look? Obviously, his passing was was definitely a tough one to see a guy like that. Probably, I mean, I would say right one of the greatest, maybe the greatest fly fishing writers. I mean, where do you stack him up against all the fly fishing writers in history?
I think I think John had an uncanny knack of being everyman. I think that the reason he was so successful was that he could, you would pick up the book and instantly relate to him.
Right.
He wasn't never put himself on some pedestal, and was very much playing. And he was that way in real life too. I mean, I would go and we'd have lunches and chat about stuff, and I was lucky enough to have him come up to our cabin in Michigan and spend a few days up there and fished with him. And he was just a real down to earth, easygoing. Didn't like the spotlight necessarily. He liked to, he promoted his books and did the obligations to move that forward as a career. But it was never really about John. It was about the sport, and he was a player, a medium to share some of those ideas. His humility in his writing, I think, was his greatest asset, and it's missed. I don't think a lot of people can replicate that. But I would also say that there are a lot of great voices, and I'm lucky to work with a number of them. And Tom Rosenbauer is now writing some trout myth stories, and again, Christine Peterson is a really great young outdoor writer from Wyoming. Family, neat approach to her columns and her writing. If you look hard enough, there's a lot of great voices, but in this day and age, it's hard to find them because people are self-publishing and self-blogging and all that stuff.
Right.
And back in the day, to get published in Field and Stream magazine, you had to be really good.
Yeah. Things have changed a lot. You've seen that, right, over the years. Has that been a interesting place to be as an editor, to see the digital and the changes over the years?
Yeah, it has. But I also think, the reverse of that is that it forces you to transcend even more to get above the average stuff. So those who are able to be a Girac, for example, and transcend the blogosphere, I think there's some really good work being put out now that's 100 years from now, this is going to be considered a really good golden age of some outdoor writing.
Yeah, it's amazing. Well, and I guess finishing that Gierock point there. So I mean, filling that role right is a tough one, but how have you been able, to do that?
Well, next person up, we have lots of people. Tom Reed has come back and is writing more. Russell James just did a really cool thing in this issue. Voices that are going to be more and more prominent as we keep going. Andy Pegman, there's a lot of really good talent out there. So I think it's just a matter of handing off the microphone and seeing what works. And I'm a risk taker as an editor, and I'll run things up the flagpole. I'll run a story about going and fishing with a punk rock musician in Trout Magazine. And, granted, the Trout readership is not typically a bunch of punkers, but
Yeah, right.
But there's something to be said and something to be explored, and it's working. So until they tell me otherwise, I'm going to keep taking risks.
Keep taking risks. I think that's a smart move. We try to do that in the podcast too. I think podcasting and what you do is a little bit different, but we've had definitely some episodes I know where we've gotten some hate mail. Like we had episode 407. We had David Gravett on. He's a professional skateboarder, and he dropped so many f-bombs. I mean, I got the feedback there was pretty crazy, but I loved it because the guy is so passionate. He's so passionate about what he does, and it was just like you could hear it, and you still see it out there. So I feel like anybody with the passion is worthy of a conversation. Like, how do you see that? Have you guys received some hate mail, and how do you deal with that?
We do, but I try to. At the end of the day, that I agree with you that the more diverse the opinions are, doesn't it really underscore the beauty of fly fishing? That someone who's a professional skateboarder who's dropping F-bombs and all that is, equally enamored with this pursuit.
Yep.
Some cardiologist doctor from suburban Washington, D.C., or some woman who's a librarian in Boulder, Colorado, or whatever. There's the fact that we can all kind of find common ground, especially in this day and age. It's a uniting thing, and trying to get ourselves as far away from the stereotype of the old white man in tweed smoking a pot, walking along the river. That's just a fallacy these days, and showing the reality that it is a diverse and interesting and challenging and youthful and energetic sport, I think is the future.
Pescador on the Fly offers a full range of fly fishing gear for any angler at any budget, with premium rods delivered directly to you. The El-Ray G6 is the most packable, high-performance fly rod on the market, performing like a 4-piece rod but with unmatched portability in 6 pieces. And you can get 10% off your next order right now if you use the code WETFLYSWING at pescadoronthefly.com. Never fly without your G6. Discover the El-Ray series and more at pescadoronthefly.com. FishHound Expeditions offers world-class fly fishing right off Alaska's incredible road system. From monster rainbow trout to feisty Arctic grayling, you'll chase big species in the stunning landscape. Whether you're a seasoned angler or just starting out, their expert guides ensure an unforgettable adventure. Book your trip today before spots fill up and experience Alaska's diversity like never before. Check them out right now. That's fishhoundexpeditions.com. Maybe let's jump into a little bit on the magazine for those that maybe haven't been keeping up with Trout Magazine. Can you give us a little update on what you've been working on, either recent issues or what's coming up here?
So we have themes for every issue, and believe it or not, I've got them charted out for a few years. And it's just a way to collect stories and kind of keep bumpers on the lanes. And so the theme we're working on right now that's going to come out in June is public lands. And going out, and it's not so much, again, a focus on the threats to the public lands, which are plenty, but rather we're focusing on the celebration of the great experiences to be had on public lands and calling out some really neat places that anyone can go and enjoy. And one of the things I've learned, takeaways, I'm very lucky in that I've gotten to go to all over the world to write stories about fishing, right? So somebody has to take one for the team, so I did. But I've been all over the world, and every single place I've gone, while it's wonderful and people are excited about the opportunities, the thing of it is there's uniform admiration for the United States in our public land system. People in England, while going and fishing the pristine beats on the River Test is an amazing experience. At the end of the day, they're like, wow, you've got literally billions of acres of walkable land that it's really kind of a unique thing in the world. So celebrating all that
is amazing.
Yeah.
And that kind of goes back to, I'm not sure if you're a big history buff, but do you know, I guess that kind of goes back to Teddy Roosevelt, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And, that's the greatest idea in America, right? The national parks is considered our greatest idea and our greatest treasure. And so, and again, I think that it's one of those things where the cause is uniting and not dividing. Yeah, it's been politicized a little bit lately, and there are some on one side of the aisle that are advocating for divestiture of public lands. But at the end of the day, people who hunt and fish and hike and camp realize that that's such a great asset. They don't want to get rid of that. And that doesn't matter what political walk of life you're from. That's something that we can all agree on. It's pretty nice to be able to look across out my window now and look up on the national forest land and know that there's tens of thousands of acres and dozens of little creeks and streams that I can go walk out and fish anytime I want to. We're lucky.
Yeah, that is really lucky. That's amazing. So you guys are spotlighting the kind of the public lands, and does that look like, are you focusing on a specific area or just covering it more in general?
No, in fact, one of the things that we really endeavor to do with Trout Magazine is have geographic balance. So we've got stories from California and up and down the Rockies, the upper Midwest, New England. I've got a really cool story about northern Vermont. So we really try to balance every issue with north, south, east, and west as well.
Yeah, you do. Right. And that's always that's I think a struggle for sometimes, I know when we got started, we were really focused, kind of Western. We've now been around long enough to expand over the whole country. But again, I don't know it as well. That's one of the challenges, right? Like part of the Southeast, I haven't fished down there, as much as I would like. Do you have places for you that you're thinking like, okay, we got to really put more time in this state or this region to do, in the upcoming years?
Yeah, believe it or not, I'm reminded of that by readers. Someone will
Oh,
say,
you are right.
"Yeah, you haven't really written about Eastern Tennessee in a long time. Maybe you ought to come down and do." I'm like, okay, I keep an open mind, do that, but the squeaky wheel gets the grease sometimes, but we try to balance it out. And going back to the original thought, we also chase the best story, right? So I try to run stories, even if it's a story about a place in Wyoming. I want that to be compelling and interesting for the person in Grand Rapids, Michigan, or, Stowe, Vermont, or wherever, Atlanta, Georgia. We try to have national appeal or at least lessons that either can be lifted and transposed to their world or inspires them to go and seek that adventure wherever that is. So that's another really important part of the editorial mix.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, that's it seems like from my perspective, I don't know as much. Obviously, I'm not an editor, but just running a podcast, there are some similarities,
Sure.
and the story is the biggest one. I think that's kind of what podcasting really excels in the fact that, that's kind of what we're doing. But you're telling the story today, right? You're actually telling the story of TU and kind of some of the people you're connected with, which is cool. Well, one story, and again, we've been on this a hot topic. I kind of came to the game a little late, but did you guys ever cover the story of the feather thief story?
I sure did. Yeah. And I've actually fished with Kirk Johnson.
Oh, you did?
And yeah, several years ago, right when the book was coming out, nobody knew who he was.
Nice.
Super cool guy and great writer and a great book for sure.
Yeah, great book. Yeah, I mean, he's definitely got the skill for sure because you read that one and it keeps you on the story is just kind of bizarre, but we had Kirk on and we talked about it and I'm kind of following up with a few people so that's an interesting story because I think for me, I didn't realize it. I mean, I've been in fly fishing most of my life and I didn't realize that little sector of the fly tires, right? That some of them don't fish. It's really this really highly prized exotic species, which are endangered and and the theft and stuff. What's your take? Did you connect with that the classic fly tying groups? Do you know much about those folks?
Well, you hit the nail on the head, but you can talk about lots of little niches in fly fishing, right? So there's this big umbrella and we all fall under it one way or another, but you've got carp people, for example.
Right.
You chase carp religiously and that's all they do, but they're fly fishing for carp and they're kind of this, I'm going to say this affectionately, they're this own group of weirdos.
Right.
And I'm a part of that. Then you've got the fly tying obsessed weirdos who do their thing, and then the steelhead weirdos who stand in
That's
sideways sleet storms and
true.
catch
Yeah.
every season, Or
And the striper weirdos, right? All the the stripers, everything.
you've got the saltwater junkies of the people, my buddy Conway Bowman who chases sharks with fly rods. There's all these weird, wild little sub stories that kind of in mosaic make up the whole fabric of fly fishing. So that's been an interesting thing for me as an editor is you go from being a writer, which is like playing the lead violin in the orchestra, to conducting the orchestra as an editor. And so learning how to bring in different parts at different times and to play all those little niches and dive into those subjects is really fun and fascinating. And I think that that's also part of the appeal for the everyday consumer of stories or listener of podcasts, that you can flip something on and find something that flips your particular switch and tune out turn the page if it's not your cup of tea.
No, that's a great point. Yeah, somebody listening now can just press stop. You know what I mean? That's the basic thing about it, and maybe follow up. Later.
I hope they don't. I hope I didn't done that.
We have more good stuff to come here today, so yeah, we hope they don't. But no, I think that's well said because the feather thief story is just one little niche within fly fishing, and there's tons of niches. Whether that's what you talked about or anything else, and we're all. I feel like pretty much fly anglers are super passionate. Do you find that because you've kind of been in the sports world? Do you think fly anglers are as passionate as say NBA or any other sport? Or do you think they're more passionate?
Yeah, I think that for sure there's a deep-seated passion because it's a community, right? It's a tribe. It's a culture. And I think that there are other sports, particularly participant sports, that are the same way. Like scuba divers are equally passionate. They travel, they seek adventure, they're doing that kind of stuff. Golfers, there's a tradition, rules that go back, and both sports are rooted in Scotland 600 years ago, and traditions that have been carried for generations and so forth. Baseball is,
Our American sport.
Americana, apple pie.
Yeah.
So I see a lot of that as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. No, it was we had a recent episode. We were talking about Ted Williams. He was obviously a great athlete, maybe one of the greatest hitters of all time. But we were talking about how he had this quote that said that toughest things to do in sports are to hit a golf ball, to hit a baseball, and to cast a fly rod. Right? Like that's what Ted Williams, coming from Ted Williams, who was the greatest hitter of all time and a good fly fisherman, I think. But what do you think about that on the on the fly, the casting? I wanted to get a little bit into the gear here, because I know you do some gear reviews and things like that.
Sure.
What is it about, it all starts with the cast, right? Whether that's like people seeing it like, oh my God, it's the river runs through it, right? The shadow cast, whatever. But what's your take on the casting? Do you guys try to hit that in some of your content? Do you try to get new people into the sport? How does that look with fly casting? Do you think that's the hardest step?
It's certainly, there's been research done by scientific anglers and Orvis and other companies where they've focus grouped and all this, and it comes down to the two inhibiting factors that keep people away from fly fishing are being intimidated by the cast and intimidated by complexity of tying knots.
Oh, knots.
Yeah. So knots and casts are the hurdles that people need to climb over. My feeling about casting has evolved over time, and that if 20 years ago, I thought it doesn't matter how you cast, and it shouldn't be an obstacle, and you shouldn't feel bad if you don't have the greatest cast. And that's all still true. I don't think you have to have a perfect cast, but then again, we've created so many methods now where you don't have to cast, and instant gratification of pulling on fish by flopping a weighted nymph rig upstream. And I'm not condemning that, but have grown to appreciate the commitment to learning to cast, and to do that is really filling out of the whole fly fishing experience. And I think people kind of cheat themselves if they don't endeavor to learn the casting and figure out some of those things. Again, I'm not trying to be snobby about it, but I think that dedicating yourself to learning how to cast and do it well is like dedicating yourself to learning a golf swing. And you're going to play the game better, and it's the basis for the whole sport. So, I'm not, some people, I went to the Golden Gate Casting Club a couple of years ago.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, with my friend Jim Dawson, and watched that. And, at first I thought, how silly that you would have just casting. All these people are obsessed with casting. And then you go there and you see this and you think, my goodness, first of all, it's the nucleus for so much that's developed in the sport.
I know.
The rods, the traditions, the techniques, everything can be kind of traced back 6 degrees into that one spot, the Golden Gate Casting Club. But then you see people from all walks of life, and the diversity factor that I was talking about earlier, and see the sheer joy that people are able to share and the common ground that they're able to find, and how they're united in this casting culture. And I think it's an exquisite thing. I think it's wonderful. And I've kind of grown away from thinking, oh, those casting snobs, all they care about is this. And then it's too many complicated physics lessons, and you're overcomplicating things, and you're making it less accessible for people. Yeah, you can say some of that's true. But on the other hand, if people are willing to jump on or off the learning curve at their own pace, I think casting's a really cool vehicle to keep people attached to the sport.
Yeah, I think it's really cool. We've actually done quite a bit on casting recently this year. We've had, Tim Rajeff on, and we've talked a lot about, and he obviously goes back to the Golden Gate. We talked about, we even had Jim Dawson on because I met him down there. So we've been going on this part, and it's been cool because we've got into the history of fly rods, and I've talked about this a number of times, but how fly rods have gotten faster and faster, but the actual people winning, the casting championships out there are actually people using old, medium action rods from the 80s, because they're more flex, you're feeling it. We've talked about that. What's your take on, the fly rod? Do you have a take on what is the best rod for, somebody getting into it, or there's so much out there, what do you say on the fly rods type?
Yeah, I like to say I'm like the Will Rogers of fly rods. I've never met a fly rod I didn't like. So they're all good for different reasons. I will say that a lot of the fast action rods, to me, are intentionally designed to compensate for casting flaws. So it's just like oversized drivers in golf or bigger sweet spots on your irons. And the best players in golf who can shape shots and do amazing things are still playing with blades. And I think it's the same thing with fly fishing. I like to, I have a couple bamboo rods and just recently gotten into that, but just because I just recently have been able to afford that. But I like that slowed down, deliberate action. I like a good meat. I'd still say a medium fast graphite rod would be my first choice. I'm not really into the super, super fast stuff because I like the sensitivity. But I think that the market in general is coming back that way. If you look at what Orvis is touting with their new Helios and Scott with Centric and the new classic R8 from Sage, people are coming back to the art of casting and making rods that people can feel and appreciate that and promoting them accordingly, which I also think is good for the sport, right? I think it's good that we as anglers don't simply go out on a seek and destroy mission every time we're out fishing. It's not about numbers. Shouldn't be. It's not sustainable if everyone just goes out and the only day that's a good day is a day when you catch 30 or more fish.
Right.
Not sustainable for the resources. So slowing down your action, slowing down your cast, considering more about mixing up your approach, go for a technique slam in a day, throw dry flies, streamers, and nymphs in the same day, try to catch one fish each way. That's the kind of stuff I think, generally speaking, the fly fishing community is moving more toward. And I think that's a healthy place to be.
Yeah, that is. Yeah, it feels like you said, there's a lot of the analogies, the golf and fly fishing, but yeah, you kind of have a club for every, whatever you need, right? Whether that's a Euro nymphing stick or a trout spay or whatever that is. One of the rods I was actually out casting, I know you reviewed this one, was the a Pescador on the fly, the El Rey G6. It's got some unique, the 6-piece part of it is definitely unique, but I was out casting it. I probably cast it for 30 minutes and recorded myself because I wanted to see,
Yeah.
what it looked like. And I haven't done that really. Looked at my cast, I was like, wow, I've got some work to do. But tell us about the El Rey, the G6, the review you did. Maybe talk about maybe some features, just kind of what your overall take was.
Well, again, I think you're referring to Fly Lab, and we've done that's where we're doing product reviews. Tim Romano, who's been my partner with Angling Trade for years, Andrew Steckedy, we've launched this site called Fly Lab, flylab.fish. And we do honest reviews of products there where it's not so much what the manufacturer wants us to tell you, but it's what we really feel about the stuff. So Romano was actually into that rod and he passed it on to me. And obviously the unique appeal is the 6 pieces and you can take it anywhere. But I'm impressed that the action, back in when I started, it was 2-piece rod and you were making a big sacrifice if you went down to 4 pieces because they just couldn't maintain that good casting action and durability and all that stuff. Well, technology now and the resins and graphite that they use and everything is such that they can. And so I was impressed that I thought that the feel and the bend that went all the way down toward the grip was something that the responsiveness of the rod, I think, was something that I was more impressed with than I thought I would be. So,
Yeah.
And then the components, that's where the money, the fancy bells and whistles and the rod tubes. And frankly, that's where we're going to see pricing pressure if tariffs go through and aluminum
Oh, right.
more and all that stuff. So we're going to find out how much people really care about their aluminum rod tube.
Oh, right. Yeah, that's all going to get more expensive.
But those are things that I think this company is doing a pretty good job with. So
we wrapped up a 5,000-mile road trip to Wisconsin last year, and our Project M from 4-Wheel Campers made the entire journey better than we imagined. From remote campsites to spontaneous detours, we had the freedom to go where we wanted in total comfort. For over 50 years, 4-Wheel Campers has been building ultra-durable, lightweight pop-up campers that fit almost any truck bed. The pop-up design sets up in under a minute, and with the Project M like we have, I can set up and still use my tailgate and truck bed whenever I need it. Whether you want a minimalist setup like mine or something fully built out, like the Premium Orvis Edition, 4-Wheel Campers has a camper to match your adventure goals. Do you have a truck? Head over to 4wheelcampers.com right now, customize your camper, find a local dealer, see upcoming events, and more. Trust me, you're going to love checking out 4-Wheel Campers. And what is the, you mentioned the Fly Lab. How does that look when you get, I think that's part of the challenge, right? You get a, maybe a rod or any piece of gear that maybe doesn't stand up to the review, or how do you deal with that when you've got maybe some issues? You know what I mean? How do you do the review? Because I think that maybe is a struggle for some people.
If I really hate something, I just won't write about it.
Yeah.
It's too small a world and the walls are too thin in the fly fishing industry that, well, it might make a splash if I really panned something. There are too many good things to focus on. Same things we were talking about with Trout Magazine. There are too many wins and good news to focus on.
Yeah. Well, and I also think it seems like in this day and age with all the politics, it seems like that's part of the problem out there is that, like, just with social media and everything, right? The more negative you are and the more, that seems like the more views you get, right? You take a side and it's like, so it's growing this kind of polarized thing, right? I feel like that's not a good thing.
Right. But on the other hand, you got to tell the truth. So if there's something that, if it's, I'll talk about it right now. The Orvis Helios rod, the new version 4 of Helios. I love the rod. It's great. I'm not sure that any fly rod in the world is worth $1,200.
Right.
That's expensive. You can buy a shotgun for $1,200, or you can buy a set of golf clubs, or you can buy a lot of things. Skis, poles, bindings, and boots. But on the other hand, it's American-made craftsmanship. I've been in the factory. I've seen the 50-some steps that it takes to make one rod, and I know the thought that goes into it from design to production. So just talking about things in balance, I think, is really important. And, if I think that the fighting butt was too small or could be a little bit longer, sure, I'm going to say that. But by and large, I focus on things that I really like. And I really like the Orvis Helios rod. Just wish it weren't quite as expensive as it is.
Yeah, these rods, they definitely, things don't get cheaper necessarily, right? There's probably, if you go back 20 years, I'm not sure what the prices look like, right? Were things a little bit less expensive? I guess things always are going up, right?
Yeah, but, I think it's also one of the truths that nobody really says, but I'm willing to, is that the technology, like in golf, every year they come out with a new driver, and you feel like you got to go spend $500 on a new driver because, of course, the driver is going to fix your game. Has nothing to do with your crappy swing, right? So you do that, and it's the same with fly rods. Every 5 years they'll come out with a new and improved whiz bang model, and what happens though is they don't put the old technology that was the greatest thing since night baseball 5 years ago. They don't put that in a vault and seal it up and never use it. They just rebrand it as their mid-price point rod. So, like, I'll tell you, the Scott Session rod right now, it's got cool greenish hues on it and so forth. You take it out and you cast it right next to a Scott Radian, which was the best thing going 10 years ago. And if you closed your eyes or blindfolded yourself, you wouldn't really feel the difference. I think they're essentially the same rod. And this one costs, $700 instead of $1,200. So people should be on the lookout for that. And that's been fun for me, is to try to identify sleeper products that, maybe are a little bit below the radar that people don't really know about that are really worthy and will last you a lifetime, and you'll have a ball fishing with.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Finding those sleepers, and yeah, like I was saying, they got the some of the casting, champions, and Maxine McCormick is somebody who we're, hopefully going to have on and hear some of her story about, how a 14, 15-year-old girl wins, the world championships, right, in casting. And part of it was this rod that they created. It was totally unique and fitted to her, and she obviously was a hard worker. But yeah, I think it's really interesting. I think the fly rod is interesting. I think that fly lines have obviously evolved with rods, and there's challenges and cool stuff there too. But well, let's start to take it out of here with kind of our our conservation segment. We've already talked at the start, and obviously TU is all about that. But are there a couple of topics that, again, big ones we should be that are on your radar? You're really thinking about that we can. You mentioned the public lands. Any other big ones coming up that people should be getting involved with?
One of the thoughts that I've been working on and kind of flushing out in my mind as an editor, the more I think about it, the more I believe that we as anglers, how we interact with the resources is in and of itself a conservation issue, maybe second only to climate change. In other words, the pressure we put on a river collectively, how many fish we catch, how long we fight the fish, the techniques we use to catch the fish, how we handle fish, keeping them wet or taking photos and all that stuff, all together. At the end of the day, if conservation by definition is really kind of a measurement of how many fish are going to be in the river next year and the year after and the year after that, how we go about our pursuit of fishing is in and of itself a major conservation issue. And I think, fortunately, more anglers are taking stock in that and being self-aware, and there's a growing level of conscience about all that. And I think that's something that we want to keep pushing, not be heavy-handed. People love to be taught how to fish, and they hate to be told how to fish. There's a subtle difference. But encouraging that conscience, realizing that there's only so many cookies in the cookie jar, and we all are sharing, and not being a selfish angler and thinking about what you're paying forward and how you're doing that. I think that that's kind of the wave of the future. So that's my number one conservation stump that I'm standing on right now.
That's awesome. Yeah, and that goes for, you mentioned a lot of things we can do out there, whether it's keep them wet or, you hear lots of different things, keeping your, wetting your hands before you touch the fish and, how long you play the fish. Right? There's all sorts of things, barbless. Is that something that you guys will be like, is there something coming up in an upcoming issue where you're going to be focusing on that topic?
Yeah, absolutely. We'll talk about treble hooks and,
Treble.
yeah, because spin fishing is fine. And, where the regulations are so that people can keep and eat fish, that's totally fine. But if you're going to just catch and release, there's really no room for treble hooks. They do more damage than they're worth. So if you're going to use a Panther Martin, great. Just use a single hook on it. Switch it over. But having said that, we also need to make sure that the fly angler, even if you do all the right things, there's a certain level of mortality associated with catch and release. Whether it's 2%, 5%, 10%, whatever. And a lot of that has to do with the water temperature, how long you fight the fish, what type of fish it is, the type of water you're fighting them in, all that kind of stuff. But going and catching 50 fish in a day with barbless hooks and catch and release and keeping your hands wet, you're still making an impact. You're still pressuring the resource, and maybe more than the guy who goes out and catches one or two and puts them in a smoker and eats them. So we need to be respectful and understanding of all aspects and try to do what we can do to make sure that there's sustainability as the popularity of the sport increases, which I think it is going to continue to grow. I saw some data last week that, we're up 4%. All outdoor is up 1%, and some of them are flat. All fishing is actually down. Conventional fishing's down a touch. Fly fishing's up 4%, which is not screaming, but it's moving in the right direction. As we grow, is more and more important as we get younger people into the sport. That's awesome. I want that more than anything because they become stewards. But let's make sure that we're teaching the conscience as part of all that.
Yeah, it's part of all that. What is out of the, you mentioned 150,000, people that are subscribed. Out of those, what percentage, are most of those fly anglers, or do you have a chunk of conventional or even other, outdoor related people in there?
97% of Trout Unlimited members are fly anglers, and 60% will say that they do both kinds of fishing. So most of our members do all kinds of fishing, but 97% are fly anglers.
Yeah, that's right. And that's why the treble hook issues or any of those, you can get that message out to those 60%. And then, you can move the needle a little bit, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But that's why people ask, why don't you run more stories about conventional fishing? Or why don't you have a cover with a panther martin hanging out the side of a brown trout's mouth? And I'm like, well, 97%. And they did do that. If you look at old Trout magazines
Oh, really?
in the 80s, oh, yeah, there's treble hooks and MEPs and all that stuff. And it shows how we've learned and evolved, and for the better or worse in some ways. You can argue both sides, but yeah, it's fun. So, but yeah, we're focused on fly fishing mostly, but open to other ideas too.
Yeah, gotcha. Remind us again on the Fly Lab. Where can people go find, what you mentioned about the El Rey review or any of the reviews you guys do?
Yeah, we do reviews, and there's a membership program, so like people can get discounts on products by going there. So it's just flylab.fish, FLYLAB.fish. Flylab.fish is our URL, and you can go and we do sign up. You get a newsletter for free every other week, and that doesn't cost anything at all. And the reviews are on the site and everything. So that's all free access. But if you pay a small membership fee, $25, that opens the door to some discounts with our partners, which is how we float the boat, how we support the thing.
Yeah, how you support it. And this is connected to TU, or is this a separate thing?
It's a separate thing I've done in partnership with Tim Romano and Andrew Steckety, who are, Andrew and I are cousins, and Tim and I have been partners with Angling Trade, which covers the business of fly fishing for like the last 20 years. So Angling Trade is going to fold into Fly Lab, and we're going to have a business-specific section newsletter.
Oh, gotcha. So Angling Trade is going to become Fly Lab, or they'll become one.
Yeah, we're going to keep the Angling Trade section. It's kind of like the business section of a newspaper, right?
Yeah.
That'll be the Angling Trade section. But Fly Lab, as it continues to grow, and it's grown quite a bit in the last year, we've got, 15,000 subscribers now and growing, hopefully more and more and more. As it keeps going, that's going to become the predominant brand and trade inside of that.
Gotcha. So basically you go there, you get a bunch of, essentially the value would be gear reviews and discounts on gear, on fly gear.
Yeah, gear reviews, discounts. We also do, those tips in there, how to, where to travel, a little bit of everything. It's kind of an online community. So
amazing.
And to be honest with you, it's kind of full circle. Like my day job obviously is Trout Unlimited and making Trout Magazine, but this is my little bit of creative outlet where I get to say what I really think, especially about products. So much like this podcast has been, it's been refreshing for me to say what I really think.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's what I love about the podcast, because I think that, again, like we said earlier in the podcast, we've gotten, some hate mail occasionally, right? But that's what's great about it, is that I feel like I'm the host, and my goal as a host is to let my guests talk and tell their story. And, even if I don't agree with the story, you know what I mean? Like, I just want to hear what your story is. And that's what's cool about it. I think what I've always loved about the podcast, and it sounds like that's what you're trying to do at Fly Lab too.
Yeah, that's right. We're there to drop the puck. The game from there.
Right. What about, we're going to get out of here pretty quick, but a couple other topics and things that have been coming up. So Patagonia, the company, we're going to be doing some stuff with them. They got this, they're kind of promoting their new waders or the Swift Current kind of line, stuff like that. But what's your take on Patagonia? Have you followed that company for a while? Do you kind of keep up with what they have going?
I love Patagonia. I just got a box yesterday from Nick Blixt, which I think I haven't opened it yet because it's in my car still, but Pretty sure that there are some waders in there.
There you go. There you go. Right.
I've heard wonderful things about the Swift Current waders. So far, I'm eager to put them on and fish in them myself. Most importantly, obviously, the ethos, you talk about conscience, right? And
Right.
putting back and conservation. I mean, Patagonia is in its own league.
Yeah. Nobody's close, right, out there in fly fishing or really kind of in the world outdoor, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, there are some other companies, don't get me wrong, there are some other companies that do a lot of really great. Orvis, 5% in conservation. There are some companies that do really good things, and swing above their weight. Scott does great stuff, I think. I can go on and on. I'm not trying to, Fish Pond does nice stuff. But Patagonia pretty much wrote the book on that. And I have nothing but respect. And respect for the products themselves, how they've lasted, how I've fished in them, and how they're made, the processes, the overall conscience is something to be admired and acknowledged. And I think that's just the way it is.
That's right. Yeah, I love Yvon Chouinard. He said his quote. We had him on the podcast, and he said, basically that they've done everything the opposite of other businesses throughout his entire career, and it's always worked out even better. You know what I mean? When they've done the opposite, everybody says, don't do this. They do the opposite. It seems like he's such a unique guy, right? From being the dirtbagger sleeping out of his car to having the same car to giving his company away because he doesn't want to be a billionaire, right? It's kind of this unique, amazing, inspiring story.
Yeah, it is. And I think that to put a wrapper on it, like that is fly fishing in a nutshell, is that it's really about the story. Fly fishing isn't about pulling on fish. Fly fishing is about the people, the community, the places, the landscapes, the natural beauty, all those things wrapped together into a compelling story that evolves. And that's, to me, what fly fishing is all about.
Yeah, perfect. Well, I think we can leave it there, Kirk. Again, I would love to chat with you, down the line again if we get an opportunity. But have we missed anything today? Anything you mentioned, Fly Lab, anything else you have going or topics or anything you want to shed light on before we get out of here?
No, I've got a book coming out in a year from now. And so I won't talk about it now, but I'll tease that it's in process. It's going to be a cool one.
Yeah. Well, give us a little upside because this episode we're going to get probably, a year from now is going to come quick. Just give us a rough idea. Did you have a title yet, or do you know?
Yeah, we're going to call it a fishable feast, like movable feast, and it's food and fly fishing adventures from around the world. And I'm doing it in partnership with Matt Sapinski. I just let the cat out of the bag. That's the first. It's been published by Rizzoli, and it's a spring title, 26, and it's kind of like Anthony Bourdain goes fishing. So hopefully people will like it and get some of the flavors of that, and it will remind them of places they've been or inspire them to go to places and fish and find those adventures.
Perfect. All right. We got a little, some unique, some new stuff on the podcast here. This is awesome. Good. All right, Kirk. Well, like we said, we'll send everybody out to tu.org, checking with you there, or flylab.fish. And this has been really great to catch up with you finally here and get an update. And hopefully maybe down the line we'll follow up with you and see what else you have going new. But appreciate all your time today.
I appreciate the opportunity and really, wish you luck and thanks so much.
All right, if you haven't yet, go check in with Kirk. Go subscribe, get a membership to Trout Unlimited, and you will get one of the big bonuses is a subscription to Trout Magazine. So everything we talked about here, everything coming up, it's all in there. And all you got to do is check in with Trout Unlimited. You can also check in with Kirk at some of the other stuff he has going. Let him know you heard this podcast, and let him know. And if the book's out, go and pick up that book. All right, if you're interested, Wet Fly Swing Pro, this is our membership group. Go to wetflyswing.com/pro, sign up there, and we'll follow up with you on details when we launch this out for the next cohort. If you want to be part of the next cohort that goes out with Wet Fly Swing Pro, you can do that right now. Sign up there, wetflyswing.com/pro, and I'll follow up with you on details. Big announcement next week for us. We are launching the Project Healing Waters big trip next week to the White River. And this is an awesome event that we're doing with Project Healing Waters. Really excited about this one. If you're interested in supporting one of the best groups out there, again, check in next week. We'll have a great episode to share all of the details. All right, that's all I have for you. I appreciate you for listening all the way to the end. I appreciate you for listening to this episode. And if you have any questions, check in with me anytime. I hope today, if it's morning, if it's afternoon, or if it's evening, you're having a great day. And I look forward to talking to you on the next episode.
Thanks for listening to the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show. For notes and links from this episode, visit wetflyswing.com.